I was standing barefoot on my private stretch of sand, watching the sunrise over the Atlantic Ocean, when a shrill voice shattered the peaceful morning like nails on a chalkboard. "Excuse me. Excuse me, sir." The woman marching toward me wore a visor, khaki capris, and an expression that could curdle milk. "You cannot be blocking access to this beach. This is community property." I turned slowly, coffee mug still warm in my hands. "I'm sorry, what?" "I'm Linda Patterson, president of the Seaside Meadows Homeowners Association." She thrust a laminated badge at me like it was a police credential. "All residents have a right to access the beach, and you've erected an illegal fence blocking the pathway." I blinked at her, genuinely confused. "Madam, this is my property. I own this section of beach. The fence is on my land." Her face flushed red. "That's impossible. All beachfront in Seaside Meadows is designated for community use. It's in the HOA bylaws." "I'm not sure what bylaws you're referring to, but I have the deed right in my house. This beach has belonged to my family since 1952. I kept my voice level, though irritation was starting to creep in. "My grandfather had purchased this property long before any HOA existed, before Seaside Meadows was even developed." Linda's eyes narrowed. "Are you Vincent Ferraro, the new owner of the old Ferraro estate?" "That's right. I inherited it from my grandfather 6 months ago. I'd moved down to Neptune Beach, Florida from Boston to escape the corporate grind and finally use the property that had sat mostly vacant for years. The house needed work, but the private beach was pristine, untouched, perfect. Well, Mr. Ferraro, when Seaside Meadows was incorporated in 1998, all beachfront properties were required to provide easement access to HOA residents. Your grandfather signed the agreement. I seriously doubt that. My grandfather had been fiercely protective of this land. He turned down multiple developer offers over the decades, refusing to let anyone dictate what happened to his beach." "I'll be sending you a formal notice," Linda snapped. "You have 2 weeks to remove the fence and provide appropriate beach access, or you'll face daily fines of $500. She spun on her heel and marched back up the sandy path before I could respond. I stood there, coffee forgotten, staring after her retreating form. What the hell just happened? Back in the house, I pulled out the property documents from the filing cabinet. The deed was clear. My grandfather owned not just the house and the 3 acres surrounding it, but also the 200 feet of beachfront extending from the high tide line. There was no mention of any HOA agreement, no easement, nothing that would give Seaside Meadows any rights to my property. I'd barely finished reviewing the documents when my doorbell rang. A courier stood there with an envelope marked urgent in red letters. The letter inside was even more absurd than Linda's morning ambush. It claimed that my illegal obstruction of community beach access violated sections 4.2, 7.8, and 12.1 of the Seaside Meadows HOA covenants. I was ordered to remove the fence within 14 days, create a clearly marked pathway to the beach, and provide reasonable accommodations, including trash receptacles and seating areas. I called my attorney that afternoon. Mark Sullivan had handled my grandfather's estate and knew the property's history. "Vincent, I can tell you right now, you're not part of that HOA," Mark said after I explained the situation. "Your property predates their incorporation by almost 50 years. When they formed the association, your grandfather explicitly refused to join. I have the correspondence in my files. So they can't force me to open my beach. Absolutely not. You have no legal obligation to them whatsoever. But HOAs can be persistent, especially when they think they're right. Document everything and let me know if they escalate." They escalated. 3 days later, I found a group of people setting up beach chairs and umbrellas on my sand. I walked down from the house, noting that they'd cut the lock on my fence gate. "Hey, you can't be here," I called out. "This is private property." A middle-aged man in swim trunks looked up. "Linda Patterson said we have every right to use this beach. She's the HOA president." "Linda Patterson is wrong. This is my property and you're trespassing." "That's not what she told us." A woman in a sun hat glared at me. "She said some entitled new owner was trying to hoard the beach, but that we shouldn't let him bully us." I felt my jaw tighten. "I'm going to ask you one more time to leave, then I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," the man shouted. "We're not doing anything wrong." I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Within 20 minutes, 2 Neptune Beach police officers arrived. I showed them my property deed and explained the situation. After reviewing the documents and taking statements, they politely asked the trespassers to leave. "But Linda said," the woman started. "Madam, regardless of what anyone told you, this is private property," Officer Davis said firmly. "You need to leave now or you'll be cited for trespassing." The group left, shooting me dirty looks over their shoulders. Officer Davis handed me a copy of the incident report. "You might want to consider posting no trespassing signs," he suggested. "Make it crystal clear, and get a better lock." I spent the next morning installing heavy-duty no trespassing signs every 50 feet along the fence line, and replacing the gate lock with a thick chain and padlock that would require bolt cutters to breach. I also installed security cameras covering all the access points. The response came that evening. Linda Patterson herself, accompanied by 2 men in polo shirts with HOA board embroidered on them, arrived at my front door. "Mr. Ferraro, your behavior is unacceptable," Linda began without preamble. "You had our residents arrested. They were asked to leave, not arrested, and they were trespassing. They were exercising their legal rights. Show me the legal document that gives them those rights." I crossed my arms, "because I have a deed that says otherwise." One of the men stepped forward. "I'm Robert Chen, HOA Vice President. Mr. Ferraro, we're trying to resolve this amicably. The residents of Seaside Meadows have been using this beach access for years. When my grandfather was alive," Robert hesitated. "Well, no. The property was mostly vacant, and there was an understanding. An understanding isn't a legal agreement. My grandfather never gave permission for anyone to use this beach. Just because he wasn't here full-time doesn't mean people had the right to trespass." Linda's face was turning purple. "We're prepared to fine you $50,000 for this obstruction. Fine me all you want. I'm not a member of your HOA, so your fines mean nothing." I started to close the door. "Please leave my property." "You'll regret this," Linda shrieked. "We have resources. We have lawyers, so do I." "Goodbye." I closed the door and locked it, my heart pounding. I wasn't used to confrontation like this. In Boston, I'd spent 15 years in corporate finance, dealing with difficult people, but something about Linda's entitled rage was different. She genuinely believed she had the right to my property. The next few days were relatively quiet, which made me nervous. Then I received a certified letter from a law firm, Hendricks, Moore and Associates, representing the Seaside Meadows HOA. The letter demanded that I cease and desist from preventing lawful beach access, and threatened legal action if I didn't comply within 7 days. I forwarded it to Mark immediately. He called me within an hour, and I could hear the amusement in his voice. "Vincent, they hired Steve Hendricks. He specializes in HOA disputes, but he's not particularly good at research. I'm drafting a response now. This is going to be fun." "Fun isn't the word I'd use. Trust me, they have no case. We'll shut this down fast." Mark's response was a masterpiece. 6 pages of legal precedent, property law citations, and historical documentation proving that my property was entirely separate from the HOA, that no easement had ever been granted, and that continued harassment could result in counter-litigation for intentional infliction of emotional distress, slander of title, and trespassing. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I woke to the sound of machinery, heavy machinery. I ran outside in my pajamas to find a construction crew removing my fence. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted over the noise of the excavator. A foreman in a hard hat turned. "We're removing an illegal structure. We have authorization from the Seaside Meadows HOA. They have no authority here. This is my property," he shrugged. "I just do what I'm paid for, buddy. You got a problem, take it up with them." I was on the phone with Mark within seconds, then calling the police again. By the time officers arrived, half my fence was demolished. The construction crew had a work order signed by Linda Patterson, authorizing the removal of unpermitted structures blocking community beach access. Officer Davis looked tired. "Mr. Ferraro, this is getting complicated. This is really a civil matter. They're destroying my property, I understand, but they have a work order from the HOA. We can't just arrest them without proof that what they're doing is illegal." "I have the proof. I showed you my deed." Mark arrived 45 minutes later with an emergency injunction from a judge he'd managed to reach. The construction crew was ordered to stop immediately and remove all equipment from my property. The foreman was furious, but he complied. What remained of my fence looked like a war zone. Sections were torn down, posts ripped from the ground, and deep tire tracks scarred the sand. I stood surveying the damage, feeling anger boil in my chest. "We're filing charges," Mark said quietly. "Criminal mischief, trespassing, destruction of property. And we're suing the HOA for damages, legal fees, and punitive damages." "Will it stick?" "Oh, it'll stick. They just committed several crimes based on zero legal authority. This is going to get very expensive for them and possibly very serious for Linda Patterson personally." That evening, as I was trying to salvage some of the fence materials, a car pulled into my driveway. A woman in her 30s got out, looking nervous. "Mr. Ferraro, I'm Claire Newman. I live in Seaside Meadows." She glanced back at her car as if considering fleeing. "I wanted to apologize. I'm on the HOA board and I voted against all of this. Linda has been pushing this beach access thing for months, but when Robert and I asked to see the legal documentation, she kept saying she'd produce it later." "Did she ever produce it?" Claire shook her head. "No. And after today, after what happened with the construction crew, I did some digging. There's no easement, is there? Your property was never part of the HOA agreement." "No, it wasn't." "Oh God." She looked genuinely distressed. "Linda told us your grandfather had signed documents, but that you were refusing to honor them. She said you were trying to steal community property." Some people believed her because, well, people have been walking to that beach for years and no one stopped them. "My grandfather was rarely here. That doesn't mean he gave permission." I know, and I'm so sorry." Claire twisted her hands together. "Linda is completely out of control. She pushed through the vote to hire the construction crew without proper board approval. She's been collecting special assessments from homeowners to pay for all this legal action, telling everyone it's necessary to protect our property values." "How much has she collected?" "Over $60,000 so far." Claire looked miserable. "People are going to lose their minds when they find out the truth. Can I ask, are you really suing the HOA? "My attorney is, yes." "We're going to lose, aren't we?" I softened slightly. She seemed like a decent person caught in a bad situation. "Probably. But if you voted against this, If you have documentation showing you opposed Linda's actions, that might protect you personally." "I kept emails," she said quickly. "I have everything. I even warned Linda in writing that she needed to verify the legal standing before taking action. Give copies to your own attorney. You might need them." After Claire left, I felt slightly less angry. At least some people in the HOA had common sense. But Linda Patterson had created a disaster, and now innocent homeowners were going to pay for her arrogance. The police pressed charges 3 days later. Linda Patterson was charged with criminal mischief and authorizing destruction of property. The construction company filed a complaint too, claiming Linda had misrepresented her authority and that they'd lost money when the work was stopped. I watched the news report on the local station with grim satisfaction. Linda gave a defiant interview on her front lawn, insisting that she'd done nothing wrong and that she was protecting the community from a land-grabbing newcomer trying to steal their beach. Mark called immediately. "Did you see that?" "Just watched it. She's destroying her own defense." "Keep recording everything she says publicly. It's all evidence of her malicious intent." The civil lawsuit moved forward. Mark filed for an expedited hearing given the ongoing harassment. In the meantime, I hired contractors to repair my fence, installing an even sturdier version with concrete posts and security features. The cost was significant, but Mark assured me we'd recover every penny. Life started to normalize somewhat. I worked on renovating the house, which had been my original plan before all this chaos started. The beach in the early mornings remained my sanctuary, though I couldn't fully relax knowing that Linda was still out there, plotting whatever revenge she thought she was entitled to. Then the break-in started. The first time I came home from a supply run to find my back door jimmied open. Nothing was taken, but someone had gone through my desk, scattering papers everywhere. The property documents were still in my safe, but the message was clear. They were looking for something. I upgraded to a full security system with interior cameras. 2 nights later, the cameras caught a figure trying to enter through a window at 2 a.m. The alarm scared them off, and the police found footprints in the garden, but no other evidence. "This is escalating," Officer Davis said grimly when he came to take the report. "You need to be careful, Mr. Ferraro. Some people take property disputes very personally." "You think it's related to the HOA thing?" "I think it's likely. Has Linda Patterson contacted you recently?" "Not directly. But she's been posting about me on social media, calling me a thief and a liar. Screenshot everything. That's harassment and possibly defamation." Mark added the harassment to our civil complaint and filed for a restraining order against Linda. The judge granted a temporary order, requiring Linda to stay at least 500 feet from me and my property, and to cease all contact, including online posts. That should have been enough. It wasn't. The hearing for the civil case arrived on a humid morning in late September. I dressed in a suit, feeling uncomfortably formal, and met Mark at the courthouse. The HOA had assembled a crowd of supporters, residents holding signs that said, "Save our beach," and "Stop property theft." Linda stood at the center, directing people like a general commanding troops. When she saw me, her expression twisted with contempt. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Martha Reeves, reviewed the case documents with a furrowed brow. The HOA's attorney, Steve Hendricks, presented first. He argued that my grandfather had verbally agreed to allow beach access, that the community had relied on this agreement for decades, and that denying access now constituted a violation of implied easement and community standards. "Your Honor, the The residents of Seaside Meadows have used this beach access in good faith for over 20 years, Hendricks said smoothly. To suddenly revoke that access is unconscionable and potentially illegal under adverse possession statutes. Mark stood for our response. Your Honor, there is zero documentation of any agreement, verbal or otherwise. Mr. Ferraro's grandfather explicitly refused to join the HOA when it was formed. The property deed clearly establishes ownership with no encumbrances. As for adverse possession, that requires a minimum of 7 years of continuous, open, and notorious use without the owner's permission. Mr. Ferraro's grandfather visited the property regularly until his death and never gave permission for public access. The occasional trespasser does not establish legal right. Judge Reeves looked at Hendricks. Counselor, do you have any documentation of this alleged agreement? We have testimony from residents who claim I asked for documentation, not testimony. Do you have a signed easement? A letter? Any written communication whatsoever? Hendricks shuffled papers. The HOA's position is that the long-standing practice constitutes. Answer the question, Counselor. Do you have documentation? No, Your Honor, but then you have no case. Judge Reeves cut him off sharply. Mr. Sullivan, please present your counter-claim. Mark laid out everything. The property destruction, the harassment, the break-in attempts, Linda's defamatory social media posts, and the emotional distress caused by months of intimidation. He presented bills for fence repairs, security system installation, legal fees, and documented time lost from work. Judge Reeves listened intently, her expression growing darker. When Mark finished, she turned to Hendricks. Does your client dispute any of these allegations? Your Honor, Mrs. Patterson was acting in good faith on behalf of the community. Acting in good faith doesn't include destroying private property or hiring construction crews to demolish a lawful fence. Was Mrs. Patterson informed at any point that Mr. Ferraro's property was not subject to HOA jurisdiction? Hendricks hesitated. She may have received some indication, yes or no, Counselor. Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Ferraro's attorney sent documentation, and she proceeded anyway. She believed the documentation was incorrect. Judge Reeves removed her glasses and pinched the bridge of her nose. Believing something doesn't make it true. This court finds in favor of Vincent Ferraro on all counts. The Seaside Meadows HOA is ordered to pay damages in the amount of $68,000. Covering property repairs, security installations, legal fees, and compensation for harassment and emotional distress. Additionally, Linda Patterson is personally liable for an additional $25,000 in punitive damages for willful destruction of property and continued harassment, despite being informed of her error. Gasps erupted from the HOA supporters in the gallery. Linda shot to her feet. This is outrageous. That beach belongs to the community. Mrs. Patterson, sit down, Judge Reeves ordered. Another outburst and I'll hold you in contempt. You can't do this. We have rights. Bailiff, remove Mrs. Patterson from the courtroom. Security officers approached Linda, who shrieked and tried to shove past them. The scene devolved into chaos as Linda struggled and shouted while being escorted out. Other HOA members rushed after her, yelling about injustice. In the sudden quiet, Judge Reeves looked at me. Mr. Ferraro, I apologize that you've had to endure this ordeal. I'm issuing a permanent restraining order against Mrs. Patterson. If she violates it, she'll face criminal charges. This court is adjourned. I walked out of the courthouse in a daze. Mark clapped me on the shoulder. That went better than expected. She's going to lose her mind. She already has. But she's also broke now and facing criminal charges. I doubt she'll have the resources or the stupidity to continue. I wanted to believe him. But as I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. I was right. That night, around 11 p.m., my security system started blaring. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the camera feeds. Someone was at my fence with wire cutters, systematically destroying the new section I just installed. But this time, I had clear footage. I called 911 and watched on my phone as the figure worked. They were wearing dark clothing and a hood, but their build and movements seemed feminine. When police sirens sounded in the distance, the person fled, but not before looking directly at one of my cameras. Even with the hood, I recognized Linda's face. Officer Davis arrived with backup. I showed them the footage, and they immediately went to Linda's address. I followed at a distance, unable to resist seeing this play out. Linda's house was ablaze with lights. I could hear her shouting from the street. "I don't care what he says. He's lying. I was home all evening." "Madam, we have video footage," Officer Davis said patiently. "And we found wire cutters in your garage with fresh metal shavings that match the fence material. Someone planted them. This is a setup, Mrs. Patterson. You're under arrest for violation of a restraining order, criminal mischief, and destruction of property." The handcuffs clicked shut around Linda's wrists. She screamed and cursed the entire time they loaded her into the police car. Neighbors came out to watch, some looking shocked, others nodding as if this confirmed suspicions they'd held for a while. Claire Newman appeared at my elbow. "I'm so sorry. We're all so sorry. We're holding an emergency board meeting tomorrow to remove Linda as president and figure out how to handle the financial mess she's created." "How bad is it?" "Bad. Between the legal fees, the judgment against us, and the special assessment she collected under false pretenses, the HOA is basically bankrupt. People are talking about dissolving the entire association." I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Linda did this, not me. I know. And we're going to make sure everyone knows that. We're also going to issue a formal apology to you if you'll accept it. I'll think about it. The criminal trial happened 6 weeks later. Linda had hired a new attorney, a defense lawyer who tried to paint her as a concerned citizen, protecting her community from an aggressive outsider. The prosecutor systematically destroyed that narrative with evidence. The documented proof that my property was never part of the HOA, the warnings Linda had received from her own board members, the restraining order she'd violated, and the video footage of her destroying my fence at midnight. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts, Judge Thomas Brennan, a stern man with silver hair, showed no sympathy during sentencing. "Mrs. Patterson, you engaged in a sustained campaign of harassment and property destruction based on a fundamental misunderstanding that you refused to correct even when presented with clear evidence. Your actions cost your community tens of thousands of dollars and caused significant distress to Mr. Ferraro. This court sentences you to 6 months in county jail, followed by 2 years of probation. You are also ordered to pay restitution of $15,000 to Mr. Ferraro for the additional damages you caused after the civil judgment." Linda's face crumpled. "But my family, my home. You should have considered those consequences before breaking the law repeatedly. Bailiff, please take Mrs. Patterson into custody." I watched as they led her away, feeling a complicated mix of vindication and sadness. She'd brought this entirely on herself, but it was still sobering to see someone's life implode over their own arrogance. Outside the courthouse, several reporters waited. I gave a brief statement, emphasizing that I'd only wanted to protect my property, and that I hoped the community could move forward peacefully. Claire Newman also spoke, apologizing on behalf of the HOA and confirming that they were restructuring their leadership. In the weeks that followed, life finally started to settle. The HOA paid the civil judgment using their reserve funds, which essentially wiped out their treasury. Several homeowners filed suit against Linda personally for the special assessments she'd collected, though I doubted they'd recover much. I finished repairing the fence and resumed my house renovations. The property was starting to look beautiful, the way I'd imagined it when I first inherited it. The beach in the mornings was peaceful again, just me and the ocean and the sunrise. 3 months after the trial, I was replacing some rotted deck boards when Claire Newman stopped by. She looked hesitant, clutching a folder. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said. "I wanted to give you this in person." Inside the folder was a formal letter from the Seaside Meadows HOA board, signed by all current members. It was a genuine apology, acknowledging that Linda had misled them, that they should have done more due diligence, and that they took full responsibility for the harm caused. They also included a check for $2,000, explaining that it was from a voluntary collection taken up by residents who wanted to contribute to my legal costs beyond the judgment. "You didn't have to do this," I said, surprised. "We did. What Linda put you through was wrong, and a lot of us are ashamed we believed her for so long. We want to be better neighbors." "I appreciate that," Claire smiled. "Also, if you ever want to actually let people use your beach, we'd be grateful, but only if you want to, only on your terms." No pressure. I thought about it. The beach was beautiful and it seemed selfish to keep it entirely to myself, but it was mine and that distinction mattered. "Let me think about it," I said. "Maybe we can work something out eventually with a proper legal agreement." "Of course. Whatever you're comfortable with." After she left, I walked down to the water. The sand was warm under my feet, the waves gentle. My grandfather had loved this place, had protected it fiercely. But he'd also been a generous man who'd shared what he had with people he trusted. Maybe, eventually, I could find a way to honor both his protectiveness and his generosity. But it would be my choice, my decision, on my terms. That was the whole point. I spent the rest of that day working on the house, making plans. The master bedroom needed new drywall. The kitchen was getting a complete overhaul. The deck would be extended. This place was becoming mine, not just in legal ownership but in sweat and effort and vision. As evening approached, I sat on the partially completed deck with a beer, watching the sky turn orange and purple over the Atlantic. My phone buzzed. A text from Mark. "The restitution check cleared. Congratulations on officially closing this chapter." I smiled and raised my beer toward the ocean. It had been a hell of a few months, but I'd stood my ground. The property was mine, secure and undisputed. The HOA had learned an expensive lesson about respecting property rights. And Linda Patterson was learning an even more expensive lesson about the consequences of refusing to accept reality. The next morning, I woke early as usual and made my way to the beach with coffee. The sunrise was spectacular, painting the water in shades of pink and gold. I'd been coming down here every morning for months now, and it never got old. As I stood there, I thought about everything that had happened. The confrontations, the legal battles, the stress and anger. And I thought about what Claire had said about maybe letting people use the beach eventually. The truth was, my grandfather hadn't kept the beach private because he hated people. He'd kept it private because he hated being told what to do with his own property. The distinction was important. I pulled out my phone and sent Claire a text. "Let's talk about setting up a proper beach access agreement. Limited hours, strict rules, written contract. Interested?" Her response came within minutes. "Absolutely. Thank you so much, Vincent. On your terms always." I pocketed my phone and turned back to the ocean. It would be my choice, my terms, my property shared willingly, not taken by force or fraud or entitled arrogance, that made all the difference. Over the next several weeks, Claire and I, along with a few other reasonable HOA board members, worked with Mark to draft a proper beach access agreement. It was nothing like what Linda had demanded. Instead, it was a carefully constructed legal document that protected my rights while allowing limited community access. The terms were specific. Beach access would be available 3 days a week during daylight hours only. No more than 20 people at a time. No fires, no loud music, no alcohol. Residents would need to register and receive access codes for the gate. Any violations would result in immediate revocation of privileges. Most importantly, the agreement could be terminated by me at any time with 30 days' notice. This was a privilege, not a right, and everyone needed to understand that distinction. The HOA agreed to all terms without hesitation. They also agreed to maintain liability insurance that named me as an additional insured and to pay for a part-time beach attendant to enforce the rules. When I opened the beach for the first time under the new agreement, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Families came down in the morning, grateful and respectful. People followed the rules, cleaned up after themselves, and thanked me personally whenever they saw me. It felt good. Not because I needed their approval, but because I'd found a way to be generous without being taken advantage of. Linda Patterson, meanwhile, served her 6 months in county jail. I heard through Claire that she'd become something of a pariah in the community. Her husband divorced her while she was incarcerated, and most of her former friends had distanced themselves. When she was released, she moved away from Neptune Beach entirely. I never saw her again. The Seaside Meadows HOA underwent major reforms. They hired a professional management company, rewrote their bylaws to include better oversight mechanisms, and became far more cautious about legal matters. Claire became president, and under her leadership, the organization actually started functioning the way HOAs are supposed to, handling common area maintenance, organizing community events, and staying out of people's personal business. As for me, I finished renovating the house. It took another year, but when it was done, the old Ferraro estate was transformed. I'd kept the bones of my grandfather's house, respecting its history, but modernized everything else. The result was a perfect blend of classic beach house charm and contemporary comfort. I also started a small consulting business, using my finance background to help other people who'd been trapped in corporate careers escape to more fulfilling lives. It wasn't as lucrative as my Boston job, but I didn't need as much. I had the house, the beach, and a life that felt authentically mine. Sometimes in the early mornings before anyone else arrived, I'd walk the beach and think about my grandfather. He'd bought this property with money saved from years of working as a commercial fisherman, and he'd held onto it through decades of pressure to sell or develop. He'd left it to me not just as inheritance but as a trust, a piece of history to protect. I'd protected it. Not by keeping everyone out, but by refusing to let anyone take away my right to decide. That was the lesson Linda Patterson never learned. Property rights matter not because they let you exclude people, but because they let you make your own choices about what you own. One afternoon, about 18 months after the whole ordeal began, I was sitting on my deck reading when Claire walked up the path from the beach. Her kids were playing in the sand below, and she looked relaxed and happy. "I just wanted to say thank you again," she said. "This beach access has become really special to a lot of families. My kids asked to come here specifically because it's quiet and safe. I'm glad it's working out." "It is. And I know we don't always say it, but we're grateful you found a way to share this place." especially after everything Linda put you through. You weren't responsible for Linda's actions. No, but we enabled them by not questioning her sooner. We got caught up in the idea that HOA leadership automatically meant she knew what she was doing. Claire shook her head. It was a good reminder that authority has to be earned and constantly reevaluated. After she left, I thought about that. It was true of HOAs, but also of everything else. The assumption that someone in a position of power must be right, must know what they're doing, must have legitimate authority, that assumption caused so much damage. Linda had wielded her HOA presidency like a weapon, assuming her position gave her rights she didn't have. And people had believed her because she was confident and had a title. The system had enabled her right up until reality intervened in the form of property deeds and judges who actually read the law. I'd been lucky. I had resources, an attorney who knew the history of my property, and the stubbornness to stand my ground. But how many people in similar situations lacked those advantages? How many people had been bulldozed by overreaching HOAs because fighting back seemed too expensive or too difficult? The thought bothered me enough that I started looking into it. I discovered entire online communities of people trapped in disputes with their HOAs, many of them legitimate grievances against boards that had overstepped their authority. Some stories made my experience with Linda look mild by comparison. I started volunteering with a legal aid organization that helped people navigate property disputes. It wasn't much. Just a few hours a week reviewing documents and explaining people's rights, but it felt important. My experience had taught me something valuable, and I wanted to pass that knowledge along. The seasons changed. My first full year in the renovated house turned into a second, then a third. The beach remained a constant source of peace, the community access arrangement worked smoothly, and my consulting business grew steadily. I dated occasionally, nothing serious. Mostly, I focused on building the life I wanted, simple, meaningful, and entirely on my own terms. The irony wasn't lost on me that Linda's attempt to control my property had forced me to fight in a way that made me stronger, more confident, more certain of who I was and what I valued. One morning in late spring, I was on the beach at sunrise when an older couple walked up tentatively. They looked to be in their 70s, fit and tanned. "Are you Vincent Ferraro?" the man asked. "I am." "I'm James Morrison, and this is my wife, Patricia. We bought a condo in Seaside Meadows last month." He extended his hand. "I wanted to meet you and thank you for the beach access." Our real estate agent told us about what happened with the previous HOA president. "That was an interesting time," I said diplomatically. Patricia laughed. "We heard she tried to steal your beach and ended up in jail. Good for you for standing up to her." We spent 40 years dealing with bureaucratic nonsense in our careers. It's refreshing to see someone who doesn't just roll over when someone with a fancy title makes demands. We talked for a while. James had been a civil engineer, Patricia a teacher. They'd sold their house in Atlanta and retired to the coast, looking for peace and community. They'd specifically chosen Seaside Meadows because of how the HOA had reformed after the Linda Patterson disaster. "It says something about a community that it can recognize a mistake and fix it," James said. "That's what sold us." After they left, I realized he was right. The community had come through the crisis better than before. Not perfect, but more honest, more aware of the need for accountability. Linda's spectacular failure had been painful, but it had also been instructive in a way that probably prevented future abuses. Sometimes the worst experiences teach the most valuable lessons. As the sun climbed higher, I headed back to the house. I had work to do, clients to call, a life to live. The beach would be there tomorrow morning and the morning after that and for all the mornings to come. It was mine. Legally, legitimately, undeniably mine. And that would never change, no matter how many Lindas appeared with their demands and their entitlement and their absolute certainty that they knew better than the law. I'd learned to protect what was mine. But I'd also learned that protection didn't mean isolation. It meant boundaries, respect, and the freedom to choose when and how to be generous. That was the real victory. Not the legal judgment or Linda's jail time or the money I'd recovered. The real victory was standing here on my beach, living the life I'd chosen, secure in the knowledge that no one could take that away from me. The fence stood strong. The house was beautiful. The ocean rolled eternal and peaceful, and I was home, truly home, for the first time in my life. That evening I was grilling dinner on the deck when my phone rang. Mark Sullivan, who'd become a genuine friend over the course of our legal battle. "Vincent, how are you?" "Good, just enjoying the evening." "What's up?" "I wanted to let you know I got an interesting call today." Linda Patterson's attorney reached out. She's filing for bankruptcy. I figured that was coming. Yeah, but here's the interesting part. She's trying to discharge the restitution she owes you as part of the bankruptcy. I wanted to give you a heads up that we'll need to file an objection. Will it work? Can she discharge it? Not easily. Criminal restitution is usually non-dischargeable in bankruptcy, but she's going to try, and we need to make sure the court understands this stems from criminal acts, not just civil debt. Do what you need to do. I'm not letting her weasel out of this. I figured you'd say that. I'll handle it. After he hung up, I stood looking out at the darkening ocean. Linda was still fighting, still refusing to accept responsibility. Some people never learned, but that was her problem, not mine. I'd moved on. My life was here, solid and real and good. Whatever else happened with Linda's bankruptcy or legal struggles, it was just noise in the background of a life well lived. I flipped the fish on the grill and poured myself a glass of wine. Tomorrow I'd take my morning walk on the beach, then work with a few clients, maybe do some reading in the afternoon. Simple pleasures, freely chosen, unencumbered by anyone else's demands or expectations. The life my grandfather had dreamed of when he bought this property 70 years ago. The life he'd protected so I could have it. And now, finally, the life I was actually living. The bankruptcy objection was successful. The court ruled that Linda's restitution obligation couldn't be discharged because it stemmed from criminal conduct. She'd be paying me back in small monthly installments for years, possibly decades. I didn't need the money, but the principle mattered. Years passed peacefully. The HOA continued to function well under Claire's leadership, and eventually under new leadership, when she moved to be closer to her grandchildren. The beach access arrangement remained in place, adjusted slightly over time but fundamentally sound. I never forgot what I'd learned from the whole experience. That standing up for your rights matters, that authority without legal basis is just bullying, and that community is strongest when it's built on respect rather than coercion. The old Ferraro estate became known locally not as the place where the crazy HOA lady got arrested, though people still told that story, but as an example of how property rights and community access could coexist when approached with honesty and mutual respect. My grandfather would have been proud. Not of the conflict, which he'd probably have hated, but of the outcome. The land he'd loved remained protected, but in a way that brought joy to others without surrendering the fundamental principle of ownership and choice. I grew older on that beach, watching thousands of sunrises, helping dozens of clients build better lives, hosting occasional gatherings of friends and neighbors. The house my grandfather built and I renovated became a true home, filled with memories and meaning. And every morning when I walked down to the water with my coffee, I remembered that feeling of standing my ground against Linda Patterson's entitled fury. Not because I was angry or vindictive, but because I'd learned something essential about myself in that confrontation. I'd learned that I could stand up for what was right even when it was difficult, expensive, and scary. I'd learned that property rights aren't just abstract legal concepts, but fundamental protections of individual freedom and dignity. And I'd learned that the best revenge against bullies isn't cruelty, but simply living well despite their attempts to control you. The ocean rolled eternal in front of me, indifferent to human disputes and dramas. It had been here long before my grandfather bought this land, and it would be here long after I was gone. But for this moment, this span of decades, this particular piece of earth belonged to me. Not because an HOA president said so, or because some official granted permission, but because I had legal title, historical documentation, and the willingness to defend what was rightfully mine. That was all it took. That, and the refusal to back down when someone insisted I owed them something I didn't. The fence stood. The house endured. The beach remained mine to protect and share as I chose. And Linda Patterson lived somewhere far away, still convinced she'd been right, still unable to see that her downfall had been entirely self-inflicted. Some lessons are harder to learn than others. I was grateful mine had come with property documents, a good attorney, and judges who actually read the law. But mostly, I was grateful for the peace that came after the storm, for the simple joy of owning something beautiful and being able to choose freely what to do with it. That was the real prize. Not the legal victory or the monetary judgment, but the freedom to wake up every morning and walk down to my beach, secure in the knowledge that no one could take it from me, my grandfather's legacy, preserved and protected for another generation. My home, earned through struggle but enjoyed in peace, my life, exactly as I'd chosen to live it. The sun rose over the Atlantic, painting everything gold, and I stood on my private beach, drinking my coffee, master of this small piece of paradise. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything.